Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. We've had a few requests for Salamanders Space Marines and also some more basing guides, so let's paint up this marine with bright green armor and a lava base. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly, and we'll cover the basics and paint the model to a battle-ready quality. In the second half, we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. I find it easier to paint Space Marines in a sub-assembly, so after cleaning all the parts, I attached them to paper clips and then to corks for easier handling. Then I undercoated the model with white primer. I began with a mix of 2 parts Dark Angels green and 1 part Karandras green contrast paint. Dark Angels green is too dark for what I want, and Karandras green is too light and too transparent. This mix should get me pretty close to the color I'm after, and I'll explain more about my reasoning when we get to the highlight stage later in the video. When using contrast paints, I like to work on one section at a time. Use plenty of paint so it flows into all the recesses, and then use the brush to soak up any excess. I find that short, quick brush strokes can leave a smoother surface, especially on large, flat areas like Space Marine armor. Let's leave the armor for now and start base coating the other areas. I'd like the loincloth to be a dark gray color, and I painted it with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale. If you'd like to learn how to mix your own set of gray paints, check out this video here. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for a solid, even finish. Next I shaded the dark gray with Nuln Oil. The new formula of Nuln Oil isn't as strong as the old version, and you may want to apply a second layer if it doesn't look dark enough. I base coated the leather areas next with Dryad bark. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for an even, solid finish. After the leather areas were dry, I shaded them with Aggaros Earth Shade. Next, I base coated the purity seals with Bonewhite. You may need a second layer for an even finish. I shaded the parchment next with Aggaros Dunes. Contrast paints work great for shading, and I like to think of this color like a very strong wash. I base coated the wax part of the seal next with Khorne Red. Next I painted a layer of Nuln Oil all over the entire purity seal. The parchment was looking too yellow for me, and this shade will help knock it down a bit. I painted the shoulder pads and joints next with black. You may need to apply a second layer for an even finish. While I had the black paint on my palette, I painted a narrow outline around any areas that needed more definition. I base coated the steel areas next with Iron Hand steel, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for a solid, bright finish. Next I shaded the steel with a custom mix I like to call Armor Wash. This is a mix of equal parts Ratling Grime, Contrast Medium, and Lamian Medium, and you can learn how to mix your own in this video here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could just use a layer or 2 of Nuln Oil instead. I painted a layer of Aethermatic Blue on the plasma coil. There's nothing better than a red bolter on a Space Marine. I base coated it with Khorne Red, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for a solid finish. Next I shaded the red with Targor Rage Shade, applied directly to the recesses with a sharp brush. I base coated the remaining details with Runelord Brass, leaving a narrow, dark outline. I shaded the brass with Aggaros Dunes. It gives the brass a yellowish tone, which I like. It's warm, but not quite as warm as gold. At this stage you could base the model and call it finished, but I'd like to add some highlights and a few more details, so let's keep going. Let's tackle the armor first. The green looks splotchy and uneven, and we'll fix that with some glazes of Warpstone glow. Dilute the paint with some water, and with barely any paint on the brush, build up thin layers on the model, one on top of the other. The paint should dry almost as soon as it hits the model. If it runs or flows on the surface, it means your brush is overloaded and you should wipe off more paint on your palette. Warpstone glow is a fairly transparent color, and it will take a few layers to build up an opaque finish. Some areas will get more glaze layers than others. It all depends on how the paint pooled and dried. I'm trying to create a gradation on the armor, with a slightly darker color on the underside, blending up to solid coverage on the top sections. The brush will deposit more paint when you lift it off the model, so I like to move the brush up and towards the highlights. I find this makes the blending process a little easier. When I mixed the base coat color earlier, I was after a mix that would get as close as possible to Warpstone glow in just one layer. That way it would minimize the amount of glazing I had to do at this stage. I couldn't find a single paint that was the right color, so that's why I had to make the mix using Dark Angel's green and Karandras green. Next I highlighted the edges of the armor with a mix of about 4 parts Warpstone glow and 1 part Toxic Yellow. There aren't many pre-mixed greens that I like, and I find that I get the best results by mixing my own. I highlighted the armor one more time with a mix of about equal parts Warpstone glow and Toxic Yellow. Using a very sharp brush, I painted a narrow line on the sharpest edges and corners. A high-quality Kolinsky sable brush is the best for this kind of detail work, and I prefer using Rosemary and Co Series 33 brushes. I have an affiliate link down in the video description if you'd like to get some brushes and support the channel at the same time. If you make any mistakes on the armor, you can fix them with a mix of Warpstone glow and Caliban green. The exact ratio will vary depending on how dark the armor is. Next I highlighted the dark gray cloth with glazes of gray number 2 from my custom gray scale. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Eshin gray instead. Dilute the paint with water, and with barely any paint on the brush, build up several transparent layers on the raised edges and folds. I added a few scratches here and there too. I think some texture provides a nice contrast against the smooth armor. I highlighted the gray cloth one more time with glazes and scratches of gray number 4 from my custom gray scale. And if you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Dawnstone instead. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. Next, I highlighted the leather in the same kind of way with glazes and scratches of Bloodreaver flesh. Then I highlighted the edges and a few of the more prominent scratches with a narrow line of Baneblade brown. I highlighted the purity seal parchment with glazes of Bonewhite, followed by an edge highlight with less diluted paint. If you want a darker looking parchment, you could omit this stage. I think the transparent glazes add a lot of depth and make it look more like old, weathered paper. I added a few lines of text with diluted black paint and a sharp brush. I mixed a small amount of Bonewhite with Khorne red and highlighted the wax part of the purity seal. I'd like to add a simple flame design on the shoulder pad. I'm going for more of a graphic kind of design, rather than realistic fire. I started off by outlining the pattern with diluted Khorne red. If you plan on painting this on a lot of models, I would try to make the shape simple, that way it's easy to replicate. Once I was happy with the outline, I filled in the rest of the shape. Next, I cleaned up the edges with black paint. Flames are lighter on the bottom, and I blended some Wild Rider red along the bottom half of the shape. I like to blend using several layers of glazes, built up one on top of the other. Next I moved on to Fire Dragon Orange. I started with a narrow line along the bottom, and then I blended out the top of it with a few glazes. Finally, I added a very narrow line of toxic yellow along the bottom. With the flames done, let's start highlighting the black areas. I'd like to use cool grays to highlight the black, and I started with a mix of equal parts black and Thunderhawk blue. I painted a narrow line along the edge of the shoulder pads. The armor joints are so small, I think I can get away with skipping the first highlight stage. I highlighted the black areas next with a very narrow line of Thunderhawk blue. Next I picked out the sharpest edges and corners with Administratum gray. I think these highlights are easy to overdo, so I like to add them sparingly. I highlighted the edges of the bolter next with Mephiston red. I highlighted the bolter one more time with a sharp line of Wild Rider red. I painted the rivets on the bolter and the Marine's armor with diluted black paint. Next, I highlighted the edges of the steel areas with Stormhost silver, and I added some scratches here and there too. I also painted the rivets, leaving a narrow black outline. I highlighted the edges of the brass next with a mix of Runelord brass and Stormhost silver. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Canoptic alloy instead. I think the bottom of the loincloth could use some dust. I diluted Mournfang brown with plenty of water, and with barely any paint on an old brush, I added some glazes using a stippling kind of motion. Let's paint some deep yellow lenses on the model. Starting with a black undercoat, I base coated the lenses with toxic yellow, leaving a narrow black outline. You may need a second layer of yellow for an opaque finish. Next, I painted the lenses with a generous layer of Iyanden yellow, allowing more paint to pool near the back corner of the eye. After the first layer dried, I added a second layer, again allowing more paint to pool in the top and the back corner. I shaded the lenses next with a glaze of Trollslayer orange, diluted with water. Then I shaded the lenses one more time with a glaze of Wild Rider red. Finally, I added a tiny dot of white. Let's make a glowing lava base for the model. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the top of the base, and then I added a few pieces of cork tile, followed by coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base in thinned black paint, and allowed it to dry completely. Next, I added some white paint wherever I want the glowing effect to be. It's okay to be kind of messy at this stage. There will be plenty of layers going on top of this, and we'll cover up most of it. Next, I painted over the white areas with gold yellow. I painted Trollslayer orange next, covering a slightly wider area, and leaving yellow in the deepest recesses. Next, I added some Khorne red even further away from the bright spots. I painted black over most of the raised areas next. You could dry brush this layer if you're painting a lot of bases, but I think the effect looks better when I take my time and decide where I want the glow to be and where I want to cover it up. Next, I dry brushed the base with Stormvermin fur. And then I painted the edge of the base black. I assembled the model with super glue, and then I added the transfers with a decal solvent. After the decals dried, I painted a layer of Lamian medium over them to reduce the shine. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. The green armor was a nice change of pace, and the red bolter is a fun tribute to the old classic color schemes. I do love a good red bolter. It's hard for me to get over just how long the green armor took to paint, especially the glazing stage. If I were painting an army, and especially vehicles, I would want to use an airbrush for most of the work. But for just a single model, I think the contrast method works well enough. Not to mention, it's a great way to demonstrate glazing, too. What would you like to see next on the channel? Has your favorite Space Marine chapter been neglected? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting!